All right, good morning, everybody. First off, I woke up this morning with no voice, so it's a good position to be in when you've got to actually run a Fire Talk session with my good friend Angie here. But before we get started, thank you for those of you who are in the room. It's going to be a very intimate session. If you want to come closer, we don't mind either from that perspective. It's hard to believe, though, if we look at it, that we've been living in a COVID world for basically just over 2 years now. And I actually escaped COVID all of the last 2 years until January. I had family issues. I was going back and forth to the UK 2 or 3 times during the middle of it. And then this January came back, and as I affectionately call it, the vid got me. And so believe me, I tested for this. It isn't that. So to make sure that I was here and safe. But we all know that some industries have fared slightly better and others haven't. Some have had to soldier through the pandemic. They've had to work, they've had to be in offices. But a lot of companies, especially in the insurance industry, actually had to put people out in a remote working world. They had to change the way they collaborated from that perspective. And so as we're coming back into the new ways of working, we really have to think about how do we put humans at the center of all the strategies and the workforce that we're doing. And so today I have the pleasure to be joined by Angie Wesley, who is joining us from TIAA and is the SVP Chief Talent Acquisition and Workforce Strategy Officer. I had to make sure I get that right, so I wrote it down. And I also have the pleasure of working with TIAA. I'm a partner in our workforce transformation organization with Ernst & Young. So TIAA is one of my accounts, so it's a real pleasure to actually have one of my clients here on the stage with me. So as we go through the next few minutes we have together, I wanted to have Angie share the story of what TIAA has had to deal with, the challenges that they faced and where they are now in getting people before the pandemic to through the pandemic and after the pandemic. So, Angie, as we chatted earlier when we were preparing for this session, the journey to TIAA and as it relates to what you now call Work for My Day sort of started before the pandemic really got kicked off. So, you know, maybe you could talk to us and share what were the sort of governance committees and councils that you pulled together to start thinking about this, and then how did that get accelerated and ramped up as the pandemic obviously hit, and what competencies were in those groups to make the Work for My Day program as successful as it's looking to start to be?
Yeah, absolutely. So good morning, everyone. So I would say we obviously are hearing a lot in the marketplace around hybrid and how you leverage different ways of working for employees and associates, and especially now post-COVID. What I would say is that conversation with us actually started before COVID. We had an environment to where the majority of our folks came in. That was the expectation we had set. We obviously have a lot of folks out in the field working with the institutions, et cetera. But we wanted them to have a place to come to when they weren't in the field. And so we also knew that our environments weren't necessarily conducive to the new age of talent. When we looked at our working arrangements, we also were getting constrained with space. So if you have a hub like we have in Charlotte and everybody did decide to come in on the same day, we would be out of parking and we'd be out of places for them to sit realistically. So we wanted to make sure we could think about how we could best set up our environments to be conducive, to our associates, our visitors, and then all that new talent that we're bringing in. And that's really what started what we would call the new ways of working. It started the people pledge, as we called it, because we wanted to put our people first. And that is where we started bringing together stakeholders, and we also started gathering the voice of our customer, which in this case would have been our current associates, as well as our clients that might be coming in. You know, how did they feel? Was it easy? Did we give them what they were looking for when they were there? And so that is where the project started. We then started to put a lot of focus behind it with resources. So as we think about in HR, there's very differing perspectives. So we brought in folks to, you know, from HR, whether it be the business partners, whether it be even our employee relations, because sometimes they would hear what associates were thinking. We started doing polls on our intranet internally to say, like, you know, just one quick answer type polls to get some good data going around what are they thinking. And there was sentiment out there to where I don't want to be in all the time. You know, I don't want to drive. I don't want to have the traffic. So all that work had started. In partnership, we then were working with corporate real estate. We had leases that were coming up for renewal. Did we need those leases? Did we want to do it differently? And we knew we wanted to renovate our space. So in comes thinking about essentially almost a tear down in some of our locations like New York and even Charlotte. And we started partnering at that time with like a WeWorks and used some of their facilities. Then COVID hit. So COVID hit, we all go home. And then we really put our theory to test, like, can we do this and do it remotely? And so that way, when we do finally come back, and of course at that point we never knew how long that was going to be, but it really was a testament to the energy that associates have to be successful if we give them the right tools and resources and technologies to do that. And so that's where we started really doubling down on things like Zoom. Pre-COVID, we were like WebEx, and I don't even know if I ever see WebEx anymore. So then it was like we doubled down on Zoom. We doubled down on trying to get Teams out much quicker because not everybody had Teams at that point. Teaching and training on how to use it. Then we started getting creative on how do you work across multiple locations in a virtual environment. So we brought in things to help train our leaders to think about how you manage your people. And then at that same time, as COVID started to open back up, that's where the real estate came in and we started building new spaces, tearing down new spaces, making them quite conducive. The whole time we kept that stakeholder group together. We then pulsed people across the company. We pulsed groups. We talked to other folks on the outside. What are they doing? What are they experiencing? And that stakeholder group still exists today as we went back into the office, for the most part, in all of our offices since March of this year.
Great. And as I've been working with a lot of my clients, Angie, there's been a big discussion around culture. The culture before the pandemic, the culture during the pandemic, and now what that's going to look like. So how has that transpired and what has changed, and where have you seen maybe some culture lost and some new behaviors starting to kick in?
Yeah, absolutely. So not that I said earlier, TIAA always wants to be complicated and complex. We think, we're special at lots of times here. But in all seriousness, we had COVID. We had our CEO, Roger Ferguson, at the time announce that he was retiring. We then got our new CEO, Tashunda. And then in addition to that, we had this COVID hybrid virtual model that we were talking about, rebuilding real estate. All of that's pretty much virtual while that's happening. Oh, and we went live with Workday on an HR platform, and we rebuilt our job framework at the same time too. So, we never were looking for things to do, I guess you could say. But I would just say, and I can't contribute it to COVID. I can't contribute it to the new organization of how we're working. I think it's all the above. We actually got really engaged. We had a good culture before. We're rooted and grounded on a very strong mission and purpose as our company. And I think even when folks are struggling from a culture standpoint, they still go back to that purpose and mission with us. But what we saw was production. We saw lots of things happening, lots of people engaged, wanting to contribute. And now that we are back in, you had that resistance in the beginning. Some of it was very valid, like when you're thinking about having to get on subway or you're thinking about transportation to some of the big cities. But what we've learned is when they get in, they're having fun. They enjoy the environment. They like seeing people. One person said, I haven't hugged this much in 2 years. So I do think the culture is continuing to evolve and grow with obviously a new leadership in place. But I also think it is really embracing what we're grounded on, and we're seeing that firsthand now as we're actually interacting with the people. And I think the CEO has brought a good view around what she expects in our culture and the accountability, and so it's giving people a good sense of direction on how to lead, how to look at their peers, think about their peers and partners. So we're definitely heading in a really good place.
Okay, great. As you were going through doing this inordinate amount of work in a very challenging time, obviously a lot of policies and programs had to be refreshed or rethought through. What's some of the newer policies or programs that you've actually implemented or in the process of doing so in order to support the ways of working and to actually create excitement and energy in the associate population?
So we've actually done a lot, and I would say during the onset or heightened part of COVID, it was very clear we needed to care and nurture ourselves, our associates, their families. And so wellness and benefits became a key foothold in that. While we already had a good benefit plan, we had a lot of offerings. So some of those we just made sure people were using them, made sure they were aware. Some of which we then expanded. So we think about dependent care. We were all kind of strapped if we had children that were out of school because of COVID or other things. So we expanded our dependent care and our expense reimbursement for that. We also provided them with medical resources that might have been virtual through our virtual nurses and things. And we also brought in doctors that were specialists in the field, so our associates, not just our leaders, could ask questions. We gave them resources through our employee resource groups that really got into it and spent time with them. And so a lot of that, along with other things we did during the height of COVID, and we've continued those even into now. The biggest thing that we continue to ensure that we are putting the right focus on, putting the right energy around is just mental health. And you hear about it in the news, you read articles about it, and we're probably we're unlike no other company. It's important, but I would say we are really, that's a trigger word when we hear it, or we hear folks that are struggling, and we immediately try to seek action and help them and give them the resources. Separate to that, kind of pre-COVID, we were already talking about who do we want to be? What's our working model? And then obviously we evolved that during the remote period to where we started saying, you have a persona. Like there's kind of, in our world, 3 types of work. You're either in the office all the time due to the nature of the job, you're hybrid, you kind of are a little bit of both, or you're completely remote, either based on the job, based on your location, whatever it might be. And we started trying to align that and assign that to our job families and our jobs. So it became very clear as you joined the company what was being asked of you, but also what was being asked of you if you're already here. And it also took out the bias around, well, Angie has to go in 5 days, but Angie's peer does not. So it took the bias out, took the favoritism out. And we have evolved that now completely across the entire company. We obviously have a lot of laws and regulations when you think about the countries that we're in. We're in about 27 countries. Some countries, you can't mandate that you have to be in, or you can't give them the same flexibility. So we have to navigate through that dynamic, but luckily we have people on the ground in those countries that help us with that. And then we take into account where we have things that are changing by state, by laws, which is a regular basis anymore, and ensuring that we're thinking about, multi-state taxes. We're thinking about what impact that does when you have a hybrid environment. We're thinking about that when we have completely remote folks, but, they might come into the office, and what does that look like on occasion from a taxation and withholding. So a lot of things have been in play, and they continue to evolve. But I would say, in some cases, COVID was our friend because it gave us that time to think about it and not just push something out quickly.
Okay. And you mentioned that you moved to Workday during this, maybe and moved off of WebEx to Zoom. What other technology has now been accelerated in order to create that associate experience in this new ways of working that you're working with?
So obviously Workday's a big one. Microsoft 365 is another big one that we've pretty much pushed out to the enterprise. That obviously then creates some automation within Workday that we're able to leverage. Like I mentioned, we've moved to Zoom as a company, been on it now. It's frankly like, our right hand. We do it so much. We've enhanced our teams. So we got rid of, I don't even remember what we were on, some IM platform. We got rid of that, and then we're on Teams. Now we're expanding Teams even further. It's not for it to be just a virtual chat, but like I rarely pick up the phone anymore. I just use Teams, and I video people or call, and we do a video if we feel like it, or if we don't, I just call through Teams. I do it on my phone. I can call through Teams on my phone, which is really nice when you are in that flexible environment. You don't just have to have your laptop to do all the work. Most of it can be done on your phone now. We've continued to provide different technologies based on the groups that you might be in. So there might be things that they're using to kind of do it as ideation or innovation type work, so they can all be in something together. We've continued to expand our SharePoints to where they're more active. You know, we did some things in technology to where we use OneDrive now. You know, most folks probably have moved to OneDrive, but it also is the ease in how we share documents, and we leverage documents across. We use Teams now for documents, so we'll hold documents in Teams and people can edit within that from the file. So I think that just creates, the collaboration, but it gets that spreadsheet that everybody was sending around and updating kind of gone. We continue to look for ways to keep people engaged from a virtual standpoint. So even like last week, I was talking to our intern class that was joining us in person for the first time in 2 years. So we had 300 interns. I was in the cafeteria because that was the only space that we had that was big enough for the 300 interns, but it's a 2-level cafeteria. So I was looking at a computer and I was getting broadcasted on all the TVs across the cafeteria. And we were engaging them while I was doing that, even though I was in the same room. We were throwing up quick, fun polls, you know, and they were like, we were doing it by schools and they were cheering and all this kind of stuff. And we were all together, but we were still using the technology. So I think sometimes we think about it just being virtual to leverage technology, but we're also leveraging it in person too.
Okay. And so with the amount of programs that you've put in place, and you mentioned sentiment analysis, you've been reaching out and pulsing, how are the associates faring? How are they adopting? You know, where are the challenges still? Where are the boulders that you still need to remove? Because I know we've all got some of those, and now with gas prices, people are using that as an excuse not to come into the office in a lot of my clients. So maybe you could share that with the audience.
Yeah, and essentially since COVID, and even right before, we had been collecting the sentiment of our associates, whether it be through your standard, you know, Glint surveys, Gallup, whatever you might have, you know, on a quarterly and annual basis. We would do small pulses, then we do our large one. We then started using the internet, as I mentioned, sometimes it was people just to rate their happy or sad. We would just ask them to click a happy face or a sad face. Sometimes we would ask them a question. It was kind of different every day. We had a good participation in that, and we had some really nice general learnings. We started to see where burnout was happening based on some of the things that we would ask. So we're continuing that sentiment pulse on our intranet. And then we are then taking that data within the analytics team within my space and aggregating it and pulling things out of it. Are we seeing things from that pulsing or that sentiment that align with our engagement surveys? You know, is it within a certain group, a certain skill, a certain location? You know, and what I would say is people love the idea of flexibility, and they also don't understand flexibility. So a lot of people want the guardrails on, just tell me the days you want me in to be flexible. Okay, so we're trying to break that conundrum around, like, we trust you first, and second, if we need to define days, we will do that. And some groups do, just based on the nature of the work or the nature of the location of the team. But that is the biggest thing I think people are struggling with, is the flexibility and how they control their schedule. Like, you know, someone said, I don't think I can be in by 8:30. And I said, that's fine. Take the 8:30 at home, drive in after that. They're like, I could do that? I'm like, yes, you know, so I think we're trying to help the associate, but we're also trying to understand what is still a barrier for them. Obviously, the gas thing's going to be a barrier. It's coming up in pockets, but it's going to be it's a barrier, and it's a rightful barrier for some. And we also want to understand, like, what is still lingering post-COVID, because at some point you got to get past the COVID. What is still lingering, though? Is it the fear? Is it health? Is it compromise due to health? Is it your children? Is it you don't want to put them in daycare after school? Like, what is it? So we can make sure that we're continuing to push the right benefits out to them so they just don't get lost, as well as provide them with things that maybe we haven't considered yet. And so they really help drive some of that, you know, have you thought of or will you do for our groups.
And then one question before maybe we go to Q&A in the audience, which is very intimate, but I'm glad you guys all came. Leadership. And so initially when the pandemic started, you know, you mentioned trust, we trust you, but a lot of leaders in a lot of our organizations and the companies that I service, they had a big issue at that leadership level with trust, and then how to actually manage and actually be a transformative leader and now be an empathetic leader. So how have you had to really work from an HR perspective in taking some of the old, as I would say in the UK, fuddy-duddy ways of thinking and really bring it up to today's sort of world?
Yeah, so I would say we're still on that journey. Leaders are our heartbeat to our associates. And so like everywhere else, we have really good leaders, we have new leaders, we have leaders that need some help, we have leaders that are still doing essentially work that maybe takes them away from being a leader. So we've tried to look at it from all different levels. We've done a lot of expectation setting with leaders, their role that they play. We have obviously employee relations and others that are heavily involved. Our talent management team has developed a multi-pronged leadership approach. So we have like a LEAP 100, that's new leaders, brand new to the company. Then you can move to 200, 300, and 400. And so we just don't throw it all in at one time. We let them kind of stair step through it. We do a lot with our executive leadership. So myself included, that's kind of everybody that reports to the EC, the executive committee. We come together and we try to solve things or talk about things that we feel like our leadership as a company is struggling with. And then that allows us a grassroots effort back down to the leaders. Whether it be the hybrid and some just, we've got different schools of thought. So some are like, well, I don't want my folks hybrid. They're going to be in. And so we had to work with them to say, nope, they're going to be hybrid. And this is how you should think about how you schedule that work and how you think about interacting with your team. So again, it's a journey like it is with any leadership in a company. And we're just trying to spend the time on the right things, not all things.
And then you mentioned about the workspace, that you've done a lot of changes, and I haven't been to your campus since it's been upgraded, so I'm excited to potentially do that in the months ahead. But maybe if you could share that, what are some of the things you've done to really excite people to want to come back onto the...
So our workspace is awesome. And I mean, I'm in Charlotte, and so we have a large campus here. Our New York space is the same, it's awesome. It's still all under construction. Lots of parts of it is done. Parts of it is still happening. I would say we've completely transformed what a traditional space looks like to a truly, I get excited to go in because it's so cool. Like I find these nooks and crannies to where there's like these little seats with your own desk, like you're back in kindergarten school, and you can sit and be in a little circle and you have a TV to broadcast. We have, a putting green now. We have basketball courts. We have foosball. We have all these things. The cafeteria doesn't even look like a cafeteria. We have people that are engaging with you when you come in. We have couches in the lobby now. We have outlets and chairs, so you can sit in a chair and plug your laptop in. We have little whiteboarding session rooms to where, like, literally it's 4 little stools and there's a big whiteboard and people can just come and that want to whiteboard. We have private space, we have hotel space, we have focus time space. So you can step away and just be in a little space to just truly focus on something. So again, I get excited about it. We have coffee shops, we have all these things that we might have had before it, but now it's in the right place, it's in the right location, it's easy. And there's more to come for that. So for those in Charlotte, you should come visit the campus.
Okay. And we've got about 5 minutes left, and we wanted to at least offer up to the audience. I don't know, I think we've got some mic runners in the back somewhere. Is there anybody that maybe has some questions or thoughts about the conversation that we've had, or they would like to pose to either myself or Angie? It's our plant in the front. No, I know, I'm just joking.
How you doing? So I'm Brian with UNC Charlotte. So thank you, Angie, for the conversation. I've really enjoyed it. Angie, can you share, I guess, a tool during COVID or an instance or an experiment that you guys ran as HR professionals with your teams that either didn't have an outcome that you expected or actually kind of failed and you guys had to pivot and do something else?
I don't know that we failed and had to do something else, but I would say in the beginning, Zoom was a challenge for folks to completely adopt. And some of that was just due to the technology bandwidth. Like, I think we were getting notes from IT saying you got to log off in order to do a Zoom. because they were having to adapt to all these people being remote and the servers and, the VPNs and stuff. So that was, a bit of a challenge in the beginning because some people would freeze in Zoom and then others would be talking, and it would create some frustration, especially when it happened over and over, or you're trying to have a big meeting. We had our learnings around how many people you can have on Zoom before it just literally crashes at one time. You probably don't want to put 500 people on it, or you need a special line for that. So it was that type of learning, and some of it, we pushed it out so quickly just because we needed a tool for our associates. It was almost like, let's just test and learn at the same time. And we probably could have done a better job helping our associates understand we're using this tool, which is great, but we're testing and learning at the same time. So they weren't feeling like we just had a sloppy tool potentially and experience. But quickly IT rectified that and put a lot of things behind the scenes. We also had to deploy a ton of laptops when we went virtual. Some folks didn't have laptops. They were working from a desktop, and we think about our call center. They weren't remote then, they were full-time in the office. So they turned around laptops like you wouldn't believe, in the course of less than 2 weeks, and then getting people set up on it. So clearly there was learnings for that, and now, we used to have to plan like 3 weeks ahead to turn around intern laptops or get interns ready. They can do that in like 2 days now. I'll call them and are you gonna have laptops? And they're like, oh yeah, we're good. So I think we've learned a lot of it from a lot of different things that now is actually making us better just in regular BAU.
And I think some of the things I've seen both in EY as well as with the clients I've been working with is actually getting people to understand how to now be in an environment where there's probably going to be always somebody who's going to be virtual. And so now how do you facilitate and use the tools in a very collaborative way that allows people to feel that they have a voice, that they can participate even though they may not be in an office?
Yeah.
And how do you make sure you pull those people in?
And that's a great call, because just like last week I had a group together and there were folks virtually. So what I do is I want everybody to log into the Zoom, even if you're in person. So if there's 10 of us in the room and there's 6 people on Zoom or 2 people on Zoom, I want us all logged into the Zoom. We might not obviously have the mics turned on, but then that way we can use the features of Zoom to control the conversation, the raising your hand, using a chat in Zoom, so the room doesn't dominate over the folks that are on the Zoom. And I think, honestly, it's a lot easier than I thought. I really haven't had to condition them that much. They just do it. And I think what they realize is the documents are in front of them. It makes it easier. They can take a note. So again, that's actually been a simple one that we've done to try to level set how we have participation and collaboration.
Yeah. And I think one of the big things as we've gone through the pandemic and into this new world is making sure that there's equity amongst everybody in the environment or the situation, whether they're hybrid in the office or not. And I found, talking at least with some of my other clients, that those associates, employees that are more introverted in personality have actually found it even better being in the remote world, because they feel they can raise a hand or use the tools, where if they were in a room together, they may not have necessarily had the courage or felt like they could do that. So the sense of belonging and ability to partake has been bigger.
And I think the chat helps too for those that don't want to speak up.
We have about 1 minute. Is there any other questions out there before we draw this session to a close? Okay, going once, going twice. All right, well, Angie, thank you very much for joining me this morning. It's been a pleasure. Sorry about my voice, everybody, but we've got through and we've survived. So enjoy the rest of the conference and have a great rest of your morning.
And we'll be back right after this.
Yeah, right after this, we'll be back here. Thank you.